So, Mr. Jones, how are you, sir?
I'm just fine. You can call me John. Be
All
just
right.
fine.
All right, John. Um, First of all, tell us where you are. Where do you live?
I live in Arlington, Texas.
Okay. You've been there all your life?
No, I moved here in 1955 when I went to work for the city of Arlington. But I'm a native Texan, but I was born in a small town out in West Texas.
I guess. So you've been in Texas all your life, give or
No,
take.
in 1939, my parents moved to Mississippi, and we lived over there for 10 years. My mother was from over there, and her father, my grandfather, gave my parents a plantation of 720 acres plantation if we would move over there and farm it and raise cattle and horses on that place. And so we did and lived there for 10 years and then moved back to West Texas.
Okay. So, one of the things I do for this podcast, especially, is square dance callers. When did you start square dancing, sir?
In 1954.
Just taking lessons, or how'd that come about? Family, or how'd that get going?
Now, I got married and down in the town where I graduated from high school, which is a small town called Godley, Texas. And right after that, the county was celebrating its 100-year anniversary. And each town was given the opportunity to present a program. And the people in our town decided they wanted to have a square of dancers to put on an exhibition. And so they found a gentleman in the area that had done a little bit of calling of some very old traditional square dancing. And he became our instructor, and the square of us that were together learned to square dance to his calling. And that was the beginning of my square dancing life.
Wow. Okay. So that was 1954. When did you decide you wanted to try calling?
Well, let me digress just a minute before that. The first call I ever did was in 1949 over in Mississippi. And no, it was in 1947, excuse me, over in Mississippi, and I was 12 years old.
Wow. Okay.
And my mother was a fourth grade teacher there in that school, and she had gotten a book about square dancing, and she taught a square of her students how to square dance to this particular routine, and she told me I was going to be the caller.
Okay.
And so we learned that, and it was performed before the entire school, high school and grade school as well. And one of the dancers in this square was Miss America of 1959, Marianne Mobley.
That's a great story.
And then the presentation before the entire school was done, and we had a piano player that played the music, and it was not a singing call, it was patter. But the routine was called picking up pawpaws, putting them in your pocket. It was an old traditional routine.
Okay. Wow.
So that was my first opportunity at being a caller. And then after we learned to square dance and do this exhibition, then shortly after that, in 1955, we moved here to Arlington, and the city of Arlington was sponsoring a square dance class in the upstairs of the old city hall. And we lived just across the street from it in a rent house that we had. And so we went over and took square dance lessons there from the city of Arlington. And at during that situation, I had been doing singing and what have you ever since I could remember. And I thought it sounded like a pretty good thing to get involved in. And so I began trying to learn some of the material and practiced a little bit there at that point. But that was the beginning of my calling career.
So what was that process when you were starting? Today, we've got caller schools, we have caller lab, we have all kinds of things where you can find resources. How did you learn to start calling?
Well, we had several really good callers here in our area, and they had been in the activity for quite some time. And this caller that taught us to dance began to take us around to dance with different callers at different clubs. And after that was done, and I decided that I wanted to be a caller, I took a notebook with me. And anything that a caller would call that looked like a good routine or what have you, well, then I would take time out and write it down.
Okay.
And then I would learn it. Everything we did back in those days was memorized. We hadn't heard of sight calling and that type of thing at that particular point. And most of it was older routine type calling, but little by little it began to progress into more of what we have today.
Okay. Now, and so you're calling, when do you think you kind of made that transition from memorized to starting to do sight calling and modules, and how did you go from one to the other, you think?
I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was about 1957 or 58 or something like that. A round dance instructor here in this area was on the staff to be a round dance cuer and teacher at a week-long institute up in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And the caller running the program and in charge of everything was Les Gocher.
Okay.
And so we spent a week with him there at that and enjoyed dancing with him. And then went back again the second year, the following year. And about halfway through the week, or on about Tuesday or Wednesday of the week, I talked to Les and told him that I was learning to call a little bit, and he let me call there at that week. And in talking with him, I said, "You're doing something different from every caller I've ever danced to, and I can't tell for sure what it is.
Okay.
Can you explain to me what you're doing that is different?" And so that's when he explained sight calling to me. And then for the next 3 days, every spare moment he had, he got me with him, and we sat and talked about square dancing and what sight calling was. And like I said, that was in 1957, 58. And he showed me what sight calling was. And from then on, I began to learn it and expand on it and became a sight caller at that time.
Okay. Wow. I've talked to several people about the square dance calling and everything else. And, different past, you've been doing it so long that you didn't have the caller schools like we have now. I mean, just every month you could find a caller school. So I just can't imagine how tough it was back then, and going from memorized to sight call and learning to sight call. So you start doing that. How did that feel? Was that a freedom to you, knowing that you could go up there once you started sighting it and getting a feel for it? Tell me about that.
It opened up a door for me that I could freewheel my sight calling, and I didn't have to study and memorize an entire routine.
Okay. Yep. That's something you feel after you get going for a little while. Now I kind of see the floor when it's doing that, when I do sight calling, and you don't have to memorize and listen to what others are doing. So you had a lot of influences that got you going, and you're starting to call. Did you do any traveling with your calling? Have you traveled all over calling, or just around Texas? Tell me about that.
Well, there were, like I said, there were a number of square dance clubs here in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and I would go and visit them, uh, different ones, as much as I possibly could. And after about a year or so of that, then when a club would need a caller to fill in, then I got asked to call several dances that way. And there was one club that their caller retired, and I was asked if I would be interested in being their club caller. Well, I did not feel like I had enough experience to be a club caller, to do what a club caller needed to do. And so I turned it down. And it was about another year after that before I felt like I had enough experience and knowledge to be a club caller. And so there was no square dance club here in the city of Arlington. We had about 20,000 population at that time. This day and time, we've got over 400,000 people living in our town, but none at that time. And the city had purchased an old church in downtown, and they made a recreation center in the basement of that church. And I was acquainted with the parks director, and I told him that I would like to start a square dance class and build it into a club if we could. And so he helped me get a class started there in that recreation center. And from that, we wound up forming a club here in Arlington, and I became their club caller and was for over 20 years. And but that was my beginning of getting into square dance calling. And as the years went by, and I felt like I got better, more educated, and a wiser type caller, I had 3 clubs at one time that I was the club caller for, and did a lot of attending of those club dances and club classes, and I was calling nearly every night of the week, and spending most of my time, all of my spare time, as a square dance caller and visiting other clubs as much as I could, and little by little, word got out that I could call a good square dance, and so I would pick up bookings here and yonder, and it just grew like that from one incident to another.
In all the years you've been calling, what I do when I talk to a lot of people, I'm sure everybody has stories. I've got stories, and I haven't been calling that long. Do you have any funny stories or anything that just stands out to you over the years when you're standing on a stage or watching callers or dancers?
Oh, golly. Right off the top of my head, I can't think of anything.
Okay. Well, if something comes to you, just throw that in there. So how high a level do you call?
I call through the Plus program at the present. At one time, I called through the A2 program, but I was not that interested in doing that type of calling. And so I backed off from it. And like I said, I call only through the Plus program now.
Now, another thing too, and some people can, some people can't. Do you have a favorite call of the Mainstream and Plus? Just one that stands out that you like to call?
Oh, I, I guess one of the things that I do more so than anything else is to call Do Paso.
Okay.
That call, there's been a number of callers throughout the years that have made suggestions that we need to delete Do Paso from the list, that it can be called directional without a name. But the call Do Paso has more history behind it than any other call we've ever had. And if you'd like to hear the story, I'll be
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Love to.
Okay. In the my early calling days, and for many years prior to that, and many years afterwards, here in Texas, we did a call that we called do-si-do, spelled D-O-S-E-D-O. And it was turn your partner left and turn your corner brother right until the caller told you to quit. We may do it 3 or 4 times before he would change into some other call. Marvin Schilling, who was a caller up in Colorado, wrote a singing call, and it had a do paso in it, and it said do paso and keep on doing the do paso. And he sang the lyrics of a song while that was going on. It probably went on for 10 or 16 beats before it was over with. We'd do it 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it ended in an Ali Mandar. But in the northeast part of the United States, they did dosado, D-O-S-A-D-O, which we still have today. And in Colorado and the western part of the United States, they did do-si-do, and it was a 2-couple thing. You'd circle 4 halfway around and whirl the girls across to the opposite person, man, in that 2-couple situation, and they'd turn by the right and then turn your partner by the left, and you'd do that about 2 times, and then you'd face back to the same couple and do the next call that the caller wanted you to do on some memorized routine. Well, Dr. Lloyd Shaw, Pappy Shaw, we called him, had the first official caller school that anybody knows of up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He was a teacher there of one of the schools in Colorado Springs. And he started training callers. He had a caller school in the summertime. And a lot of callers attended it from all over the United States. Back in those days, is before we had any publications or anything that were going around, but callers learned new calls. There were about 20 or 25 callers around the United States that had each other's address. And if a caller thought of a new routine or something, he would write it down and send it to somebody on the list. And that person would take it and write it down and send it on to the next person. It'd take about a year for anything like that to get around. And that was the only communication they had about new material or anything of that nature. And like I said, something other than the old traditional routines was beginning to develop during that period of time. And various callers were involved in it. Bob Osgood was involved in it. And a number of other callers that I know and had been in the program for a long time. Well, at Pappy Shaw's caller school one year, this was, in the late 1950s, Herb Gregerson, who was a caller leader of Texas, he was from El Paso, and he was at the caller school. And Al Brundage from up in New England was at the caller school. And so Pappy Shaw called them together and talked with them and told them what the situation was with the call do-si-do. And he said, we need to try to figure out some way to straighten this out where we can all do the same call anywhere we might go or be, and our dancers could dance the call. And we need to change it some way. Well, Herb was pretty hard-headed, and he told Pappy Shaw, he said, Texas is not going to change for anybody. I said, okay. Well, Al Brundage said, I don't know, I'll think about it. Well, the following day, Pappy got Herb and he said, hey, I've thought of something. He said, what do you think about if we were to, from a circle of 8 or from a squared set, that we did this call, we'd turn our partner by the left and we'd turn our corner by the right, and we'd come back and courtesy turn our partner to finish the call, and we changed the name and called it Do Paso in honor of you and El Paso, Texas, which is where Herb was from.
Okay.
He thought about it for a little bit and he said, I like that, I'll do it.
That is, I've never heard that. That is a great story. Gosh. So it's El Paso. Okay.
Right after that, they saw Al Brundage from New England. He was there and they told Al what they had done. And Al said, I didn't have a vote. And Pappy and Herb told Al, said, we didn't need your vote. It'd be 2-1 anyway. So we'll accept your vote if you want to give it now. And he said, okay, I'll give it, provided we get to keep the call Dosado.
Okay.
So that was how those two names came about and how that call came about. And like I said, Do Paso has more history behind it than any other call we've ever had. And I don't want to see it die. I'm a native Texan and it's a Texas call and it's done all over the world. And many callers, like I said, have said it can be called directional. Yes, it can. Well, after it came about in discussion about this, and this was a few years ago, I made up a list of all the calls that were on the mainstream program that could be called directional without any name. And there was about 25 of them that could be done that way. So I said, why don't we eliminate all of these calls and we can do it all by directional calling? Well, there was a big argument about that all those calls they didn't want those calls to disappear either. So, it just like alley man left can be called directional. You don't need it. Right and left grand, meet everybody around the ring. Yeah, you can call all kinds of things, but I said, we have a lot of non-English speaking countries that are learning the calls by the name that they have. And if you eliminate those names, they won't know how to do the calls by the explanation that we were to give. So I said, we don't need to do that. And that situation has kind of faded away. I haven't heard anything about it in recent time.
I didn't know that was the history. Man, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I had no idea. So for callers, I know you've taught dancers, you've taught callers and everything else. Do you have any advice for callers starting out or that have a history? Just any kind of advice toward square dance callers?
Yeah, I think anybody getting into the activity needs to do what I went through doing, that you go and visit every square dance club you possibly can and every different caller that you possibly can. And I recommend to them that they take a notebook with them. And if a caller calls something that you like, then go write it down. And that way you can learn things that we have. And of course, later on, we had callers that produced callers note services. That was one of the best things that callers ever had. Every month we received a note service that had all kinds of things in it that maybe we had never even thought about. And we learned that way by studying those note services. And then Bob Osgood started the Sets in Order situation, and he was putting out square dance routines in each of the magazines, and we learned from those. And so much of that has disappeared today that the only publication that I'm aware of in that regard is the one that Buddy Weaver now does as the editor of the American Square Dance magazine. Yes, and that's the only one that I'm aware of. And it's not near the type of information that we used to get a number of years ago from a number of different callers from different places around the United States and around the globe that could help educate square dance callers. But learning from every caller that you possibly can is one of the best ways, I think, of learning what we're doing today.
Yes, sir. I really picked up on that when I started when I joined Caller Lab in 2013, I think is when I joined. And the national conventions, the GSI schools where you have all these callers come in. And I do. Every convention I go to, I'll take my phone, I'll set it up at the foot of the stage, and I'll record these guys doing patter. I go home, I'll write down stuff. That's the only way to really learn it. You have to. So that is great advice. I appreciate that. Now, as far as square dancing is concerned, if you're not square dance calling, what do you like to do just as pastimes?
Find things to occupy my spare time, and most of it's around the house here, doing housework, outside work in the yard, and various things of that nature. But I don't know. What do I do, Deborah? Deborah's sitting over here listening to it. But
work out.
we go to a gym every morning, which is about a mile away from our home here, and we do different types of workouts there.
Okay.
We do yoga and various exercises
Very nice.
there at that gym, and I guess I stay busy enough most of the time anyway.
Yes, sir. Now, and as far as the square dancing, is as much as long as you've called and you've heard music go from in the 50s when you started to where it is now, what's some of your favorite singing calls?
Hey, I can't think offhand. Deborah, can you help me? What can you?
What about Old Man River? That's a good one.
Hey, I do Old Man River,
Mm-hmm.
which I've been doing it for many, many years. And When the Saints Go Marching In,
Yes, sir.
New York, New York is one of my better numbers. And oh, golly, I just can't think offhand right now. I don't have.
Yes, sir. I understand.
Yeah, I have one about a dog called Old Rattler.
That's yours? That's
No.
you do that one?
I do it, but I did not record it.
Okay, I know that song. I don't ever hear it, but I Tim Mariner did it years and years ago at a dance I was at, and I thought that was one of the best songs I'd ever heard. It's a great song. So you do Old Rattler, okay?
Yeah, I have a lot of fun with it.
Very nice. Well, I certainly can't let this end before I talk to you some about, because as I was talking to Deborah a few weeks ago, I've been to Caller Lab convention probably 6 or 7 times now since I've been a member. And when they stand everybody up and they make everybody sit down after 5 years and 10 years and 20, there's always a couple to 3 people that are still standing. So you've been to every Caller Lab convention, yes? What's that? I couldn't hear you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because yes, I've been to every convention.
Yes, sir. How, and I know you can't sum it up quickly, so take all the time you want. How has it changed over the years, the convention?
The other caller that has been to every convention is from Fort Worth over here, Melton Luttrell.
Okay.
And so he and I are good friends and have been for a very long time. And I learned a lot about calling from him, because he had been calling a number of years before I started. And but the Caller Lab convention has changed to a more educational type situation for callers. Back in the earlier days, it was also education, but it was, here's what you've got to do to become a square dance caller, and various things of that nature. Well, nowadays it has become a situation of, here's what we have to offer you to go through to help with your square dance calling.
Gotcha.
And there are a lot of we have a lot of Caller Lab accredited caller coaches that are still members of Caller Lab and have been for a long time. And a lot of them still promote their caller schools and at various places. And Tony Oxendine with GSI has done a tremendous amount of square dance calling schools since they got involved with it.
Yeah, I've attended several of those. I mean, that's tremendous when it comes to new callers because we don't have we everybody has a couple of their own mentors and all that from their local areas. But I saw a huge difference in my calling once I got outside of the North Georgia area where I am, and got to caller conventions, caller lab, and GSI schools. Mr. Jones, is there? I'll call you John. And I'll say this: I've never had the opportunity to talk to you. I've seen you at all the caller labs, obviously, because you've been to them. But I've seen you. I've never had the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I'd like to, probably at the next caller lab, because I know you'll be there. You've been to all the other ones. And but as far as square dancing, is there anything else you want to just put out there to the people that are watching this or will be watching this?
Well, I feel like that square dancing and square dance calling is one of the best occupations that anybody can get involved in because you're constantly meeting new people, constantly making friends with people that you never would see otherwise. And it's just a great recreation for people to get involved in as far as the dancers are concerned. And it's also a great profession for callers to get involved in to become a square dance caller and to be able to call for different clubs and to travel and meet the people that I have met all over the world. I've had the opportunity to call and do square dance situations in 24 different countries around the world as of today, and I think that's quite a feat. I decided I have a world map, and I decided one day to put pins in the map of every place that I have been, and it was amazing to me how many it is and how many different places I've been able to go and the friends that I have made all over the world.
Well, Mr. Jones, I'll wrap it up. John, let me tell you this. If not for the things that you did before I was born in the 50s and 60s, I wouldn't be doing this today. So all of the working to keep the calls, the do paso, and I love all that. Man, I couldn't thank you enough. It has been my true pleasure to talk to you today, sir. And I will see you at Caller Lab in a few months.
Well, thank you very much. I just might say that I had the pleasure of being the third chair of the board of Calder Lab.
Third chair of the board.
And I was also one of the original 9 accredited caller coaches in Caller Lab. And I'm very proud of those feats. But I still enjoy going. I enjoy seeing people that I have known for a long time and meeting new folks as well, and seeing new callers attend and hoping the activity will continue to grow.
Yes, sir. With what you started, I don't see why it shouldn't. We appreciate all you've done, and look forward to seeing you down the road, sir.
Okay, and thank you very much for the interview. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, sir, Mr. Jones. I'll talk to you soon.
I said my name was John.
Okay, John. Okay, John. I'll talk to you, buddy. Yes, sir.